So everyone, welcome. It's great to have you with us. We're going to be doing a 3-day workshop discussing how to land a visa-sponsored role in 2025. And today is day one, building your assets and finding roles that sponsor. But let me also show you what you're going to get out of the next 3 days as well. So for the next 3 days, we're going to be focusing on all of the things that you need to do in order to land your dream job, but your job with sponsorship as well in the UK. So day one, we're going to discuss with you the migreats story, so you have a little bit of knowledge about who we are and why we're the best placed people to do this with you. We're going to be going into your assets, so building the perfect UK job market friendly CV, rebranding your LinkedIn in order to rebrand your job hunt, the sponsored job hunt strategy, and finally, we're going to show you the migreats job board, but also talk about which companies you can target to help you land a sponsored job. For day two, we're going to be discussing crafting outreach and acing interviews. We're going to talk about getting the network referrals and landing interviews, having effective outreach, interview etiquette, analyzing job specs, and we're also going to be joined by a migreats coach, Maureen Dowell, who will be discussing how to answer the tell me about yourself question. And for day three, which is going to be definitely the spiciest day, which you must join on Sunday, we're going to discuss how you negotiate sponsorship, how to deal with, objections, how to position yourself as the correct candidate. And we're going to be joined by several migreats success stories to tell about their own journey in landing a job with sponsorship. Awesome. So, next slide, please, Rim. Make sure you stay to the end for a very special gift. So please keep with us. We're going to be asking you guys questions throughout as well. So this is going to be an engaging workshop. It's not just us talking at you. First things first, the migreats story. So you might know me because you may have seen me on LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok, but my better half is Rim, who is the co-founder of migreats, and I will pass it over to her to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Karina. So hi, everyone. My name is Rim. For those of you who do not know me, as Karina mentioned, I am one half of migreats. And before we kind of go into like everything that we're going to cover today, I think it's very important to kind of just tell you a little bit more about myself prior to actually starting migreats, because I think the job hunt, the sponsored job hunt experience has been like such a big part actually of my 20s. That I think it's really important for us to kind of just take a moment and just, as a community, talk about how like one day you don't just like wake up in your 20s and then you're like, I want to, spend the next few years of my life actually pursuing this kind of very hard pursuit of being on the sponsored job hunt. So I am actually originally Moroccan. I was born and raised in Morocco until I turned 18. I traveled quite a bit actually and lived in a few different places before I came to the UK, initially as an exchange student. It was in London, so I went to UCL for my master's, which I essentially did after my exchange year. I actually really, really loved London. I think for the first time ever, as someone who struggled really with like the concept of home, I could just feel like I could see myself actually belong in that city. And that's what kind of kickstarted my entire journey of really like wanting to stay in the UK and land a job, because being on a sponsored role would have been the only way for me to be able to actually remain in the country. And as someone who also, to be honest, like comes from a developing country, and someone who really wants to give themselves like more choices and options rather than by like being limited by a passport, it was also like a very important kind of like pursuit of freedom in my case. So what that essentially meant is that after I got my master's, I ended up being sponsored by my first sponsor here, which you can see, Carwow. Carwow is a B2C marketplace. They work with car dealerships. They actually have been recently valued at more than 350 million pounds, which I think is really great, and goes to show like the importance, I think, of like wanting to be part of something like really big, which in my case was definitely like participating early on at making their growth happen. I actually had to convince them back when the labor market test was like still a thing. So I stayed there for like around 3 years with them. Great run, learned so much as a data analyst and kind of hybrid data scientist. I actually got made redundant, unfortunately, like by the end of my time there, which was really, really hard being on a skilled worker visa. I genuinely thought that it would not have been possible for me to actually stay afterwards, given like how tough the market was back then. But luckily, due to a combination of, like learning to do the right things, but also luck, I was able to stay. Which essentially like took me to Clippings, which was my second employer that sponsored me. In their case, they had a license, but they just they had like a specific policy around like sponsoring people, but luckily it worked out. I spent my pandemic years for working for Clippings. And then afterwards, I essentially left them to go work for fintech, Go Cardless. I spent around 2 years with them. And afterwards, essentially in December 2022, I got my ILR after 5 years of continuous residency on the skilled worker visa. And earlier last year, I was actually able to become a British citizen. And also like throughout that time, I also kind of contracted a bit, working on some exciting projects like Nheard, which I'm not sure if you guys heard about them, but they're like really quite cool in the music tech industry and doing some like exciting stuff. So that's about me. And Karina, I think it would be really great for people to get a little more kind of story background from you. So I'm just gonna give it away to you.
Cool. So I was born in Russia. I was raised in Israel, and I moved to Canada when I was 8 years old. And I left home when I was 16 to study in the UK. And my professional history has included being sponsored by 3 different employers in corporate marketing and sales roles. I convinced my second employer to get their sponsor license and went through the process with them. I've been on 2 student visas, 3 skilled worker visas, a youth mobility scheme visa, and I got ILR after 12 years of living in the UK. So you can see here some of the businesses I've worked in. I was sponsored at FTI Consulting. I was sponsored at U Agency. I was sponsored at Cedars. I worked at Deliveroo as a marketing intern back in 2016 when I was still at the University of Edinburgh, and as an intern at Dow Jones. And my first non-sponsored role was a company called Scale Up Finance, where I led their sales team in it's a B2B sales role. Now, all of that gives you a little bit of insight into my professional history, but I think it's really important to talk about the countries that I come from, because I know that for many of you, those 2 flags, both Israel and Russia, might evoke some feelings, given that they are always in the news and not for the good reasons. And I want to make it really clear that my passion and mission in building Migrates with RIM as well is a belief that where we come from does not define who we are as individuals, and that everyone deserves a second, third, everyone deserves a chance. Everyone deserves an opportunity for a better life in a country that they want it to become their home. And I won't get into it because this call isn't about that. But for personal reasons, I wasn't able to move back to Canada. And I only actually became a Canadian citizen when I was 18. I lived there from the ages of 8 to 16. So I got my accent then. But I have always been an immigrant, and that is also a big part of my own identity. And I really can relate to people who say that, even though I know Canada does give me a lot of passport freedom and mobility, it was not my home for me. So I created my own home here in the UK. And that's why coming here, having no connections, no network, trying all my hardest to stay was so fundamental to me. And that's also part of why we formed Migrates.
When both Karina and myself around a year ago, when we started Migrates, it was not always what it is right now, which is essentially an all-in-one stop shop that really helps you while being on the sponsored job hunt. We went through like multiple iterations, but essentially I think community has always been a very, very important part of what we stand for and what we wanted to create from scratch, because for both Karina and myself, this has been a very lonely journey. So Migrates today, we are a community of around 300 people. The focus of our community is coaching, because we understand that actually, fun fact, before we created Migrates, both Karina and myself created a lot of content around our journeys. And I think the kind of common theme that we truly observed is that a lot of people would reach out to us and just really like ask for advice. And oftentimes what we realized is that the real problem is that, and this is not your fault, I genuinely believe that we live in a system where we're not equipped with the right skills and the skill set that we need to go out there in the real world and find a job and communicate your value and have like corporate, effective corporate interactions. And so really what ends up happening is that unfortunately, when you go out there into the market, what you realize is that there is like a whole lack of skills that you do not have, that you're not equipped with. And so that's why we made this choice to focus a lot of like what we do within our Migrates community to be around coaching, around properly coaching you in order to essentially go through the sponsored job hunt. So effectively what that means, we have over 150 hours of content that we have created over the last year. We host weekly Q&As with Karina and myself. We host weekly live CV reviews for our members. Every week we have either a coach or someone who's actually an industry expert. We have recruiters, lawyers, actual employers, in-house recruiters on top of external recruiters to just come and actually speak to our members about what's happening out there and where they should be focusing and making sure that they are upskilling so that not only they have a chance at actually going into this market, like tough job market, and be able to land a role and hear back, but also understand where they can like grow in terms of their own personal development. So this is our community platform that is very much focused on coaching. And then the other thing that we provide as part of Migrates is a job board. As you probably know, when you are looking for a job that can sponsor you in the UK, not all companies, unfortunately, are able to give you that, regardless of whether they have a license or not. But essentially, our job board, and later during the session, I will give you guys like a sneak peek into it when we address the point around where do you actually find these sponsored roles. And so our job board has at the moment around 10K live roles that get updated daily that are from companies that offer sponsorship. And we also provide as part of that a sponsorship likelihood tag to help you understand where you have the highest amount of chances in terms of being sponsored if you were to go for that job. So this is what Migrates is.
And I will quickly talk about things that we've accomplished, and then we can get into it, because I know people are probably like, give me the juicy stuff. So since we started, we've helped 50 people land visa-sponsored roles, and that has been across a wide sector of industries. So I've seen people here saying people don't get roles in sales or account management. We will prove you wrong. We've worked with 4 employers. We've actually helped place candidates in those companies. So that was for Borderless and Invincible. That was Kian and Grisha. And we've helped Odin get their sponsor license, and we helped Attraction Tickets sponsor one of our members because we have a lawyer that we work with. We've had over 100 interviews from people using our job board. So whenever you use the job board, they're using these kinds of, filtration mechanisms to understand if there will be sponsorship available and going through it that way. And we've helped 5 people from outside of the UK land visa-sponsored jobs. So that was Alyssa and Sarah in the US. That was Natalia in Finland, Renee in the Netherlands, and Paula from Colombia. And Paula will be joining us on Sunday to talk about getting a job from outside of the UK with sponsorship. So you will hear her story as well. Cool. Let's go into the next slide, Rim. So our mission this year is to help 500 internationals land visa-sponsored roles in the UK in 2025. That is the Migrates mission. So far, we've helped 50. Next one. Will you be next? Okay, so let's get into it. Let's first acknowledge this fact. Sponsored job hunting is hard. This is the reality. This is the truth. It is hard. There are things that are completely outside of your control. These things look like outdated employer policies, recruiters, they always give you some kind of mixed message, internal politics, sponsorship protocol, visa regulations, supply versus demand, hiring decisions, job market fluctuations, and last but not least, the UK Home Office. Lots of things outside of your control, but there's also a lot of things within your control. And that will look like your outreach methods, your ability to follow up, your company knowledge, your application assets, your mental health, which is questionably outside of control sometimes, your communication skills, your visa and sponsorship knowledge, your interviewing expertise, your interview skills, your job hunt strategy, and your negotiation skills. So these are things inside of your control. And for today, we're going to be focusing before I jump into that, if you could improve one of these skills today, which one would it be and why? Can you guys say that in the chat? Which one of these skills that you can control would you improve? Rim, do you mind going back to the other slide so that we can focus on that quickly?
Yeah, absolutely.
So which one of these skills, if you guys could today, would you look to improve that you think you need to improve? Put them in the chat so that I can see what people are saying. Outreach skills. Okay, cool. Awesome. That's going to be tomorrow's session. Then you guys have to come tomorrow because we're going to show exactly the kinds of messages you should send to people in order to get them. Okay, yeah, nice. Job hunt strategy, job hunt strategy. Okay, cool. So what we're going to be focusing on today are your application assets and your job hunt strategy. And then from that, we're going to be sliding it over to Rim, who's going to be discussing the first part of your application assets, which is crafting a winning CV.
Absolutely. So actually, what I wanted to really start with is that there are definitely a lot of moving parts that go into you making sure that you're doing all the things that you need to be doing in order to, one, build interview momentum, which I think is incredibly important, and then from there onwards, actually start interviewing and ultimately secure a role, and ideally a sponsored role. Now, one of these building blocks is definitely crafting a winning CV, an effective CV that does the work. And I actually wanted to start by just getting a feel for the room, which is right now, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident would you guys say you are in the current version of your CV? Do you think it's doing what it's supposed to do? I'm going to quickly stop sharing my screen so that I can read the comments.
Okay. People are pretty confident, which is good.
Okay, so that's great. I'm really happy to know that like your confidence is quite high. But if you're still essentially like having the issue of not hearing back or not having any callbacks, I think what I really meant to do with this next section is just to make sure that all the basics are there in terms of like the foundational work that you need to be doing to make sure that actually, if you're not hearing callbacks, it is not your CV. So kind of proceeding by exclusion, if you will. So let me actually start here because I think we definitely live in a time where there's a lot of AI, a lot of shifts, a lot of changes happening. And sometimes a lot of people, even inside our community, wonder actually, like, what is the point of CVs in, like an era of like AI and fast moving technology? And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge first that actually CVs still, like, they do remain the source of truth when it comes specifically to answering a question that is really key for any hiring manager or recruiter, which is, are you a good fit for the role? And so I think I really want you to have this as a North Star in terms of like when you go through making sure that like your CV is actually neat and effective, that it is conveying this very clear and precise idea that you are a good fit for the role title that you're applying for. So in terms of the CV checklist, I think some of the really important bits that you guys need to have in mind when going through this process is, one, paying really close attention to the overall format of your CV, and then making sure that the core sections, which are actually your professional summary, your work experience, education, languages, certifications, skills, and hobbies, are also all in order in terms of, again, conveying that very same question that the answer to that question that I mentioned earlier, which is, are you actually a good fit for the role title that you're applying for? Now, for the purposes of this presentation, if we can go to the next slide, Karina, I will be actually focusing more importantly on the two sections that I think are actually the deal breakers or makers of your CV, which are essentially your professional summary and your work experience. Now, before I kind of delve deeper into the substance of these two sections, let's first start with a little important point and touch base on the formatting of your CV. So what you guys are looking at here is essentially our Migrate CV template. And we have had more than 50 people actually go through the process of securing a sponsored job offer, and all of them have gone through this process. So I think this is definitely a tried and tested, and more members are getting into like the interview process using this. And so essentially what you are looking at here is, first of all, a very simple base. So I think, first of all, it's really important. I know that like all of us might have a little kind of aesthetic inclination and wanting to go really, like pretty and make sure that your CV is actually like a reflection of your kind of artistic inclination, which I think, in normal times, that would be great. But because we are in a world of like ATS systems and we want to make sure that your CV is not misrendered, really here, the name of the game is to be simple. No multiple grids, just one simple grid with all the kind of sections, clear titles, and that is like your kind of winning formula as far as the structuring of your CV. Now, the second part is your metadata section, which you can see here. I am circling in green. So what I refer to as the metadata part of your CV is that first part where you typically have your name. Now, again, I think it's really important in terms of personal information here to include your email, incredibly important, your mobile phone number, if you are based in the UK, actually, your LinkedIn, the URL to your LinkedIn, very, very important, because typically recruiters and hiring managers will cross-reference. And if you are in a role that actually uses a portfolio, like for example, if you're a software developer, then it's really important for you to include like a link or a designer, for example, and hyperlink portfolio as such. Now, again, very specifically in the context of requiring sponsorship, this is not the outlet or the place for you guys to mention your location if you are based outside the UK. I think if you are based in the UK, it is optional. You can add the location if you want to. There is no harm in that. But it's, again, if you are based outside the UK, I think it's very important for you to not mention that. Now, one final point here, no sponsorship status info. I know that it can be very tempting to want to be upfront about that, but actually here, again, we have seen this work really, really well with most of our members, both inside and outside the UK. Please do not draw the attention to your sponsorship status before someone actually has had the chance to go through the substance of your profile and understand actually what you could bring. And I think that's definitely within responsibility to not draw the attention to that first. So that's on the kind of metadata section of your CV, which I think is very important to kind of keep very simple and very straight to the point. And finally, in terms of the different sections that actually you need to have in your CV, it's very important to keep them to this order. Part of that reasoning, it's because typically there is a convention when it comes to what's like being the most used. And I think keeping to that convention in terms of like the essential sections to have can be incredibly important in terms of just, like building something that is well received by your audience, which in this case would be recruiters and hiring managers. So typically we start with the summary or like the profile summary, your work experience, then education, then any skills, certifications or achievements, and finally any languages that you want to mention. So that's on the formatting of the CV. Now, kind of starting with that very first important section, your professional summary. So two observations. The first one is that I think sometimes people can be really inconsistent. Like I review a lot of CVs every week inside our Migrates community, and I see the ones that actually end up having luck with hearing back. And this is not to say that it's the only thing that actually is a determining factor in your hearing back, but I think when you, again, try to think about going back to that question in terms of really making it easy to the hiring manager or the recruiter to understand your profile and whether you are the right fit, it's very important for you to include the professional summary. That's number one. Number two, it's really important for you to be very concise and structured when it comes to your professional summary. And definitely do not include any sponsorship information. So typically the format that I would personally advise that, again, we have seen really work very well, especially like I think about success stories like Chopin, for example, or Kelly, who are we going to delve a little bit more into their own use cases later during this presentation. Important for you to start with an adjective, typically it would be something along the lines of experienced, commercially driven, the role title or the type of professional that you are with number of experience, number of years of experience that you have in a specific sector or industry. So that should be your opening one-liner. And then you need to chase that with the skills that actually are really essentially relevant for the role title that you want to go after. So these typically would be really recurring in the different job descriptions that you come across every single day and that you apply to. And finally, your final kind of your concluding sentence should be about you just explicitly mentioning the type of opportunity that you are looking for next, be it in terms of like sector and more importantly, your role title. So now let's go through like an example of like what does, like if we were to bring all of these pieces together, what that would look like. And here I'm actually taking a real life example from Chopin. She was one of our earliest success stories. She is a project manager within the public policy space. She actually landed an offer with a promise of sponsorship at the end of her probation period, which was at around a lot of bit over 40K pounds. And so here, I think what I really want you to pay attention to is the fact that we really doubled down on just making sure that whatever she shares is actually very specific. And for example, here you can see that the first sentence truly highlights the number of years that she has within the research sector, because obviously that's a very important part to mention as far as public policy, as the public policy field goes. So we started with that. We also highlighted the cultural adaptability of her profile, which was definitely something that we leveraged over the course of her job hunt. The second sentence here really focuses on one of the most important skills, again, that is particularly relevant for the type of roles that she was going after, which is quantitative and qualitative data and also storytelling. So kind of showcasing that she had both that kind of technical analytical aspect, but also the communication aspect. And finally, here she actually adjusted that last sentence, in this case, to the one of the roles that she applied to, which is a learner success associate for Greenworks. So that just gives you a little understanding and a clear example of what that would look like. So that's for the professional summary. Now, moving on to the other most important section, which is your work experience section. So this section is actually the most important part of your CV. I have hired so many different times in the 7 years prior to starting Migreats, mainly in the data field, but also like for general kind of analyst profiles. And the first thing that I actually kind of go into and want to check when I want to understand who is this person that I'm going to meet in, like 30 minutes or 1 hour before I go into their interview is what is their work experience. And here actually, as a recruiter or a hiring manager, the way you consume the information in that section is very, like you do not read in a linear way. Really, the first thing that you're looking for are like the past role titles that this candidate has had. And you would very quickly actually skim through those first. And I think that's why it's really important for you to understand the experience of the hiring manager, because then you can actually kind of reverse engineer it and just make sure that when you are crafting the specific role titles that actually will go into your CV, you're not just taking a role title because it was, for example, given to you in the context of an internal entity, right? Like maybe actually you were an underwriter internally, like here kind of drawing on the example of one of our members who essentially wanted to go from like a more kind of typical underwriting insurance background and really kind of open up his profile to more of like an operations or like analyst role. I think the first thing that I want you to kind of optimize the experience of the hiring manager for is just making sure that you're doing this kind of work of like reworking your role titles so that they're a more accurate description of the type of experience that you have accumulated in that specific role or previous role that will really serve you well in this next role that you're applying to. So for example, here, going back to one of our members' example, underwriter essentially now became insurance risk analyst because part of their role also actually included them doing a lot of risk analysis and credit analysis. And so in a way, if they wanted to go for a more kind of business analyst or operational role, having that title is a more accurate description of actually what they did during that previous role that would help them go into the next role. And I really do not want you to feel as if, you're forging this or saying something that is not true. I think the way I really want you to frame it is that you want to pick a specific role title description that is more of an accurate reflection when it comes to like your profile being understood out there in the industry, not just inside the internal context of the current company that you are working for, because different companies refer to the same kind of role responsibilities in different role titles. And, sometimes they really kind of come up with what makes the most sense to them. But sometimes when you go out there, it really does not make sense, like industry-wide. The bullet points. So now that we kind of covered the past titles, really important, bullet points is like the next section, which is really important. And here, I think when it comes to the bullet points, your first bullet point is your most important bullet point. It kind of sets the tone for your entire bullet point section. And this is what I call the lead bullet point. And for this specific bullet point under your experience, the prompt that I want you to actually answer is, what's the most, like, I really want you to take a step back and think, what is the most impactful piece of work that I have delivered under this experience? Like, start there. And that essentially becomes the opening bullet point under your experience section. Now, for the other bullet points that come after this lead first one, what I want you to make sure of is that every single bullet point, actually all the bullet points need to be mutually exclusive, so no repetition. And every single bullet point really needs to kind of earn its real estate on your CV. Your CV real estate is very, very important. And you want to make sure that everything that you mention really like conveys a specific idea, communicates something. So let's look through some examples actually of like before and after. So here we are looking at the example of someone who is within marketing, social media, campaign management. And so their initial articulation of this bullet point was created marketing campaigns for teacher training courses and children's summer camps, which is a great starting point and a base to work with, but we could definitely rework this to, again, be more specific. So again, here, where we didn't just create marketing campaigns as like something generic. Like essentially this person has created, over their time within the company, they have created 3 social media organic campaigns, again, signaling like all these important parts of the experience that would be relevant for their next role. Another thing, be very quantifiable. So what was the actual impact of these campaigns that they have created? Number of impressions, if there are like any incremental sales, which in this case, they have resulted in plus 35% in terms of incremental net sales. And finally, so again, being specific, being quantifiable. Now, if we move to the next slide and go through another example, which in this one is a little bit different, we're more, again, in like an analyst type of role. So her initial kind of base that she worked from, so our member here, Anna, if I remember correctly. So she said that she utilizes Salesforce to produce and analyze reports of applicant and investment profiles, including exporting to Excel, data cleaning, and detailed analysis on Excel and Power BI. And again, here, while we do have some elements of specificity, we really need to kind of go from a descriptive tone, which is what she was going for with like using a verb like utilize, for example, to actually leading with more like stronger kind of impact driven action verbs. So like I generated and I analyzed, being very specific, again, weekly reports, not just like reports. And those reports essentially focused on grant performance, because again, specificity is very important. And finally, making sure that you are always communicating the impact. And in this case, it's tracking monthly KPI targets. Now, I think this is really great. It's a great example because sometimes the impact cannot only be expressed in like continuous numbers. Oftentimes, it can actually be like a binary variable, which kind of takes me to the second slide around actually what are the different types of impact that you can talk about. And so here I've given like a few different examples. I think the most obvious one that comes to mind is definitely revenue and retention, which is the most obvious one. And obviously you would have some numbers to back these like different examples or evidence up. A second example is definitely scope or volume. So sometimes even if you do not generate revenue or generate or guarantee retention, sometimes it's very important to just demonstrate the volume, to demonstrate the scope of the work that you have done. So typically, like the number of rows in a data set or the numbers of marketing campaigns, etc. Time that you have helped saved is also like really important here. Another one is cost that you have saved. Again, this is like the kind of inverse of revenue making. And finally, you can also play with like the concept of satisfaction, so customer satisfaction, which sometimes can be quantitative and other times can be anecdotal or qualitative. Now, in other fields or areas, like for example, creating things like visibility can be an impact. In data, a lot of actually your work as a data analyst is creating visibility where there was none before. So that also kind of counts as impact. Or sometimes, for example, if you're in risk or the legal field, like ensuring compliance and avoiding, like fines, etc., can be another type of impact. So that's kind of I know that this is getting a little bit too long, but I promise you, like, you only need to do this once and then kind of recycle it. But that first time, it's very important for you to just be aware of all the moving parts and do them well. which kind of brings me to like the closing slide of this section, which is kind of bringing everything together. So again, this is really drawing on Cholpon's example, who's one of our success stories. And we brought together like everything that I just discussed. The first thing is that we essentially trimmed what her initial experience was to just 3 bullet points, which landed in a much kind of concise and better way. Her lead bullet point is very specific, again, focused on scope when she did not have like any information necessarily around, like revenue or cost or time or like other types of impact categories. And finally, we just made sure that in her other complementary bullet points, she was very direct and explicit with measurable impact points that she evidenced throughout that experience. So moving on to this, actually, I just wanted you to actually see, because I think oftentimes you heard me talk a lot and, that's great. But I think sometimes when you actually see what has worked for other people, it can be more powerful. So I just wanted to quickly kind of walk through some examples of actually success stories within Migrates. Marina, software developer, this is what her CV looked like, sponsored job offer. Manisha, data scientist, again, this is what her CV looked like. Cholpon, this is what her CV looked like, project management, public policy. Social media exec, Margot, this is what her CV looked like. And actually, in this case, she used our Migrates CV template. Apurva, within the operations, as an operations analyst, this is what her CV also looked like. Now, let me ask you this, which I think is really important. This was like a really important point for me to make, because oftentimes, like, I hear a lot of our members prior to like joining Migrates just like make this point of like, you get so much kind of advice around what works and what doesn't work, and you should be structuring your CV this way or that way. And even when you go through all this and sometimes even pay actually for expensive CV reviews, it still does not kind of, get you to your ultimate goal of hearing back. And as I said, a lot of things go into that, but I still want you to just kind of see for yourself that what all these CVs have in common, while some of them are not a one-pager, for example, some of them are two-pagers, their formatting was different, but they all have like a kind of a common pattern, which we have seen actually kind of hold throughout all the success stories that we have seen. The first one is definitely like your relevant job titles. Incredibly important. And I really want, like, if there's one takeaway from this section, it would be this. And then obviously making sure that actually you do have relevant experience and you are showcasing your stack of skills underneath that relevant job experience. So to quickly recap, if there is one slide that I want you to remember, it would be this: simple base for ATS purposes, effective professional summary. This is like your kind of 1-minute elevator pitch, but in CV format. Make sure you nail it. Relevant past titles and experience. This is really what makes a difference, because this is where the hiring manager's attention will go first. And finally, be specific and impact driven in your bullet points, because that's their first impression of how you communicate. And you want to make sure that you are doing that quite well and effectively. And that's it on the CV front.
Thank you so much, Rim. Hopefully that gave you guys a lot of insight. I know that people on this call are all from different journeys. Some are on a graduate visa, some have no experience, some have loads of experience, but hopefully that gives you more or less what a good UK CV looks like and what's going to get you more attention. I also wanted to just highlight and say that listing London as a location or taking out locations of previous countries you've worked in does also help. But we do CV reviews every week within Migrates for all of our members. So if you were to join us officially, we could also look at your CV and help you make it more UK friendly. Next thing, rebranding your LinkedIn and how that's going to rebrand your job hunt. So LinkedIn is the #1 best way to market yourself as a job seeker. It is where employers sit. It is where other job seekers sit. It's where recruiters sit. It's where everyone is. And the best way that you can get yourself noticed is with LinkedIn. Everyone talks about having an optimized LinkedIn. I see this all the time online, but what does that actually mean? And this is what we're going to answer for you today, along with a few other things. And how can you also tell if your LinkedIn profile isn't optimized? So, why your LinkedIn profile isn't optimized. If you have a bad picture, I mean, if it's a selfie, if it's a photo that's really far away, it's not a great photo. You need to have just a normal photo, maybe one of you even smiling on a plain background, nothing fancy. If it says open to work, I cannot tell you how many people have this in their photo. if you have open to work available for recruiters to see on the back end, that's all you need. When you show that you're open to work to a wider network, you're actually not, it's like a psychological thing. Employers aren't going to look at your profile and think, oh, this person actually is great for us. They're going to just see that this person is in a sad way, like maybe a bit desperate, right? So take it out of your photo. I promise you, it's the right thing to do. Whenever there's an unclear byline, and when I talk about a byline, I'm talking about this little line that you see underneath the actual photo itself. So if it says, for this person, it's data analyst, experience data analysis, etc. No sector or industry focus, a lengthy about me section, an overload of information under work experience, an overload of skills, and poorly formatted posts if they're posting on LinkedIn. And I will show you what a good post looks like and tell you how to do that as well. So all of these things make your profile not optimized. And I know that you think that by putting in a lot of keywords, that's going to help you with getting noticed by recruiters. I'm telling you right now, the first thing that a recruiter will see is your byline and your photo. They will not necessarily see all of your experience. So overloading with information is not something that is worth doing. Now, what constitutes an optimized LinkedIn profile? So this is actually a migrate success story. Kelly, she went from a graduate visa to getting successfully sponsored in less than 4 months when she joined us. So she has a strong picture and a cover photo. She has a very personal byline, a personal about me, a succinct work experience, and her profile is actually focused on the sector that she wants to be working in. So as you can see here, it says exactly what she is, what she's doing, and what she's interested about. So sustainable tourism enthusiast. I'm not going to actually click into the other photos. I'll share the slides with you after, but you'll be able to see when you read it that it is very kind of clear in her about me section. But we're going to actually go through the byline and break it down what you need to do in order to make it a good, a good byline and a good clear byline. So let's break it down. A good byline, so the byline that is underneath your photo, needs to have your role or recent qualification, your sector or industry focus, and your personality or goal of your career. So Renee is actually a UX designer who has also been sponsored and is a member of Migrates. She joined us. She's the one from outside of the UK. Her byline says exactly who she is, a UX and implementation consultant, the sector or industry that she focuses in, which is product design, and the work that she does, which is helping teams to create meaningful solutions users love. Now, if I was a hiring manager or a recruiter, what happens when you apply for any job using LinkedIn, the spray and pray approach, if that's something that you do quite a bit of, is they will see this byline stick out. And that's the first thing that they're going to see when they're looking through the profiles, right? So you want to make sure that yours is very indicative of who you are or the work that you want to be doing. And that's why when I look at Renee's profile, I know exactly who she is. She's worked in UX. She typically focuses on product design. She's probably working in more of a B2C function. So she's helping teams and, businesses create meaningful solutions that users love, so that she's focusing on an end customer. So as a hiring manager, I understand who she is and what she's doing. Now, let's say, for example, you don't have that much experience. What are you going to say? So this is something that I probably would have said when I was first starting out, because if you recall, when I started my career, I was working in PR and communications. I had 2 internships under my belt, and I also did a bit of volunteering work at my university. So I would say something like MA in English literature. I would have maybe listed, the app from the University of Edinburgh. B2C and B2B PR and communications, that is quite broad, but that also allows me to kind of, have a wider opening of the kinds of companies or sector that I'm going after, helping SMEs discover their brand identity through storytelling. So that is something that I'm actively doing. But, again, this is just an example. It can be created differently. You could say something like, achieving XYZ, or like restructuring, or like, just like using kind of different adjectives to explain the kind of work that you're doing. So that's kind of the way that you want to focus on your byline. Like, your byline is really going to show exactly what you've done or what you've been doing, where you graduated from, what you've studied, the sector or the industry that you're interested in working in, and then the focus of the work itself. So this is Renee. Yeah, she landed a job with sponsorship and from outside of the UK. And yes, she did have a few years of experience, but she still had a really long journey of getting there. Okay, now you're about me. So this is again another member of ours, Nadine, who was on the graduate visa and then she got sponsored at Papier. So your optimized LinkedIn profile about me, it needs to be short, to the point, have a strong opener, be human, and please, for the love of God, do not use ChatGPT because it is very clear when that is the case. So when you look at Nadine's profile, it says, a social first creative currently in the paper business because she's working at Papier and that is the paper industry. Specialized in brand design and content marketing for startups and emerging brands. And then she lists the kinds of companies that she's worked in previously across diverse global markets, including London, San Francisco, Singapore, and Jakarta. She's from Jakarta herself. In the fashion and kind of the sectors that she's worked in. And then it ends on something personal, especially passionate about Gen Z centric brands, TikTok, and meme savvy. And in day 2, we're actually going to cover how Nadine outreached a brand in a really creative way that helped her land an interview. Now, let's say, for example, you don't have that much experience. Again, this is something that I want to highlight for people that might not have it as much. I've created another fake example. And this is kind of my opener. Ever wondered where do you find a tenacious BDR who combines emotional intelligence with a passion for tech products? Look no further. I've exceeded sales targets 110% in both retail sales associate roles at New Balance and internships within the fintech sector. I said Revolut. Driving commercial success and being customer first is my passion. Let's connect with my email. So I know that many of you will have only had part-time work, and for many of you that would have been maybe sales roles, like as in like working, in like actually my first job ever was working in New Balance, so that wasn't a lie. I was a retail sales associate on the shop floor. So what you need to do is still create a story around that, because just because you've worked part-time in selling some kind of product in real life, that still has taught you a lot of incredible skills. Like, you know how to communicate, you know how to work with customers, you know how to sell. And that's across the board, right? It's just about how you craft that story. And by creating like an about me that is very short and succinct, but still creates a narrative around who you are, you can really effectively show hiring managers, employers, recruiters, other people exactly who you are and what you want to be doing. And reading both my own and Nadine's bio, it's quite clear to me who this person is, and it's also quite clear to me who I am just by reading that. So you need to kind of frame your about me in the similar way. And it would work in different industries. I just saw a question about someone talking about it being more formal, because you can still position yourself as someone who is, despite working in a more corporate world, you can still position yourself as someone who has, you could say something like really passionate about the legal sector, etc. There's actually a really great person who might be on this call right now because she used to be a migreats member, but she's starting her own business. I'm going to shout her out. Her name is Mahpara. She's really active in the legal world and she's a graduate student. She's from India and she has such an active LinkedIn profile. I'm actually going to really shout her out and share her LinkedIn because I think she's awesome and she really is. She's working in a very legal sector, but she really positions herself super well when it comes to the kind of content that she's posting. I don't know if you're on this call, Mahpara, but maybe you are. So yeah, so like, you can still do it even if you are working in something more corporate. Then your actual experience. So a lot of people, what I see them do is list like everything that they have in their CV. You don't want to do that. We're looking at Kelly's experience and what she has listed here. You want to say exactly what you did or what you were doing when you were in that role. So, if let's say you were a retail associate at New Balance, you can say like, as the retail associate at New Balance, my focus was on selling, I wouldn't say shoes, but I would say like selling products to a wide variety of customers. I serviced over 5,000 customers in a 6-month span and helped the business achieve like X amount in revenue. Like, you want to be very concise with exactly what you did and just summarize it. You don't need to list all of the things that you have done. Just keep it to 1 to 2 bullet points max per your experience and state exactly what you did. Don't overload on your accomplishments. Most people are not going to be clicking in to see read more, especially if you are early stage talent. You just want to keep it very, very high level. Okay, Now we're going to move into to post or not to post on LinkedIn. And this is something that some people might feel comfortable doing, some people might not, but we've got Migrates members who do it. We have Migrates members who have gotten interviews out of it. So I want to show you guys what you should be saying or shouldn't be saying on LinkedIn. And I will preface this by saying, whoever is telling you to say that you will work for free on LinkedIn is giving you very, very bad advice. Please do not do that. I see lots of those posts. Very misguided. I've heard from many recruiters and other people that it's just, you don't want to be doing that. Please don't do it. So if you decide to post on LinkedIn, you need to have a content strategy. And there's 4 pillars of the types of content that you should be posting about on LinkedIn if you decide to post. The first one is personal. The second one is professional. The third one is knowledge sharing. And the fourth one is controversial. So let's run through it a little bit more in depth. So personal is your story, your challenges you've overcome, career transitions, or what has inspired you. Why did you move to the UK? Why do you want to move to the UK? What did you study? What was the reason why you studied your degree? If you have any kind of thing that you've overcome, maybe you've run a marathon, whatever your story looks like, I think it's nice to have an ability to tell it and do it in a way that, really engages other people in your network as well. Professional, career highlights, top 10 things you've learned, how to move abroad, network remotely, anything that you've learned throughout your profession. Like, even if it's like how, I had an interview the other day. Here are some of the things that I learned in doing a remote first interview. And I'll show you an example of one of our team members actually who does this really well, because you can talk about just job hunting on LinkedIn. It's a topic in and of itself. Knowledge sharing, so industry insights, companies or work that has inspired you, responding to major news campaigns or stories, things that you have discovered yourself. Like if you want to work in marketing, I mean, your LinkedIn game needs to be super on point. Like you have to showcase marketing campaigns that have inspired you, the work that you've seen that has interested you, et cetera, et cetera. And then controversial, anti-immigration, calling out employers, and commanding conversation. So anything that is maybe going to slightly rock the boat, but could potentially yield results. I'm going to go through a couple of examples of people who I think are really using LinkedIn in a great way. And you'll see, not many of them don't have hundreds of likes, okay? Taifa is someone that actually shouted out 3 companies to whom she applied at. And as a result of those 3 companies, like she spoke about her applications to them. They actually all responded to her because they initially ghosted her. So then they responded to her after she posted about it in a LinkedIn post. Stephanie actually works within Migrates. She's our community manager. She uses LinkedIn in a really smart way. She constantly talks about the things that she learned from using LinkedIn, how she's, how she has applied for jobs using LinkedIn, how she's interviewed, her own experiences of working. It's great. Alyssa, who is another successfully sponsored Migrates member, she came from outside of the UK. She always was talking about, UK companies and how basically the trends that she has seen from the UK to the US. And then Jason, who is a sponsored, he hasn't been sponsored yet, but he did get a job. He was in Migrates. He's a good friend of ours as well. He recently posted a whole post on, why international talent should be given a chance. So, people, like, just to give you a statistic, only 3% of people are actually posting on LinkedIn. The remainder users of LinkedIn aren't actually even posting. And if you don't want to post, you can also comment. So Rim, can you just go to the next slide? I actually, to discuss the top tips for great LinkedIn posts. So the top tips, and I'll talk about comments as well briefly, but the top tips for a good LinkedIn post is always using the correct spelling and grammar, starting the post with a hook. So here are 10 things I've learned from 250 plus job applications. Keep each line under 12 words. Make sure that the formatting looks good. Present points, evidence, and rebuttals as well. So in my posts, you can just look at my own LinkedIn posts and how I structure them. Like, it's always with storytelling, with bullet points. I keep it to under 12 words per line. And the reason for doing this is to really make sure that readability and the flow of the content is good. Now, if you don't want to be posting, that's also okay. You don't have to post, but sometimes it's nice to see, it's a good way to also meet more people, network, and meet people from, outside of your own little bubble. But commenting is another really good way to get into the visibility of people. So start commenting on people's, LinkedIn posts, on hiring managers' posts, on content that you see, and you'll start to also grow your own network that way as well. We'll also be discussing this a little bit more tomorrow when we discuss, how to network, how to get referrals, and how to effectively meet people and, that you don't know. So when used correctly, are you on the next slide, Rim?
Yes.
When used correctly, LinkedIn can be an absolute game changer. Just start using it right. And if you want to do something today, you can post about this workshop as a start. So just start using LinkedIn, because honestly, I went from 0 followers to 15,000 followers in like 4 months. And it's helped me connect with so many international students, talent, employers, recruiters, hiring managers, all because I have started posting about how to help international talent. The next thing that we're going to be covering is your sponsored job hunt strategy. So, Rim, if we can whiz through this, would be...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I understand that we don't have a lot of time, and we definitely want to we want to leave some time at the end for Q&A. So now that technically your CV should be in a good place, your LinkedIn should be in a good place, I think what's really important for you to get really clear on next is like, what is your strategy going into this process? And I definitely highly advise you, based on what we have seen work and not work, to not go with like a spray and pray strategy, and instead be really focused and intentional, which is essentially using this concept that we internally call your zone of genius. So what is your zone of genius? So if you think about it, any role title that you do comes with a set of like core skills that you need to have. For example, software development, you need to code, data analysis, scripting language, analyzing data, marketing, organic or paid, depending on that comes with a set core skills that you need to have. Now, in addition to that, typically your experiences or the personal projects that you have worked on, or really like even your interest sometimes lies within a specific industry or a sector. So for example, finance, healthcare, SaaS businesses, or e-commerce. And sometimes actually for some roles, the industry is not per se like a specific sector, but actually it is more of kind of a space or a field, like for example, being in ops or product or data. And so essentially you kind of start with your core skill, you go after like a specific industry that you either have experience in or you have like a special affinity for, and then comes your differentiator experience, which is typically in the context of that industry and sector, there is something so specific about your profile that truly sets you apart, and that becomes the thing that you bank on. So for example, if you have had like specific AI experience going into like a SaaS business or like fintech or working in ops, if you have like a specific knowledge in marketing when working, for example, in a data analytics role that is specialized in marketing, if you have had some experience, for like regulations or like legal work while working for like a legal tech. So these are the kind of specific kind of combinations that we work with. And again, here to give you like very tangible examples, I'm just going to run through a few different success stories. So remember Marina from earlier, she's a software developer. She applied for a lot of application and web application development agencies, and her differentiator factor, which truly landed her this like perfect combination of role of a technical lead, was data and management. So again, managerial experience, data experience, perfect for this type of role and the type of company that she worked for. Very similar fashion, Apoorva, what was her zone of genius? Core skill, data analytics. She had a past of working in business operations. Her ideal specific sector and field that she went after was specifically being in operations data analysis. Another example here, Margot, who's a social media executive. What was her zone of genius? Core skills, social media content marketing. Her interesting, unique differentiator was her past experience in global markets and European EMEA markets region. And again, the sector that made the most sense for her to go after was specifically B2C digital businesses with an international audience. So again, you need to kind of try and figure out and brainstorm, what does this kind of threefold Venn diagram looks like for you. Now, so if you guys are still with us, and I understand that we are a little bit running behind, it is definitely time for us to discuss, where do you find this sponsored role? So now you have your CV, you have your LinkedIn, you found your zone of genius, you know your perfect stack of skills, but actually, where do you find roles? And I think this is where it's really important for like me to talk about our Migrates job board, because this definitely came from a place of like being a very, very big pain. Because as we all know, when you look for a sponsored role, not all companies are able to actually offer that. In fact, only 2% of companies have a license to sponsor in the UK, which to me is a staggering stat. But even then, you know better than me that just because they have a license to sponsor, they would not always sponsor. And that's why, as I said, I actually spent months and still maintaining that to this date for us to build our Migrates job board. So it is what you're looking at right here. Essentially, at the moment, we have around 10K live jobs that we update daily.
Sorry, before you kind of launch into it, I know that we're running a long time, but I'd rather we run over it just so that we can give people the actual insights into it. Can you just tell us what makes our job board different? Because someone mentioned here that, how is it different to Indeed? How is it different to like anything else that exists? Why is our job board different?
Twofold. So two things. The first thing is that like with LinkedIn or Indeed or like any other job board, they actually do not necessarily tell you consistently whether the company that's advertising an open role, whether actually they have a license to sponsor or not. Some of them do, like I know, for example, like GitHub, their job posting, sometimes they have a tag, but it's definitely inconsistent. And so what I would find myself do like in the past is literally find a role and then go onto like the UK government list, download that PDF and then search for the name of the company. And sometimes that name of the company, it would be like their registered company's house name. So not even the company name. And I would literally like spend as part of like me auditing every role. Like I would spend 20 minutes just doing these gymnastics. And so really what the Migrates job board is about, it's, that all the roles that are advertised on this board that we update daily are from a company that actually has a license to sponsor. Now, as I said, we all know that just because a company has a license, it does not necessarily mean that they will sponsor you for a given role. And that's why this brings me to the second point, which is our system of sponsorship likelihood tags. So essentially we have 3 tiers, which, are maybe, likely, and guaranteed. And essentially what we do with this process is, after we get the different like open job descriptions, we analyze them, we cross-reference that with information that we have gathered from our community. And then we also look at like public information, things like, for example, salary information, and then we tag these different roles. So if a role has a maybe sponsorship likelihood, it literally just means that the company has a license to sponsor, that we don't have a lot of information to actually infer whether that role can sponsor or not. Likely means that actually we have like some good evidence, mainly the salary requirements will be met, which is a high determining factor in terms of a company actually being able to sponsor you. Because if you don't meet the salary requirements, then that's just kind of, dead. And finally, guaranteed. And these are a little bit kind of hard to come by, but there are a lot of them depending on the role title that you're looking for. And this typically means that the company or someone within our community has hard reference that actually this company is able to sponsor. And hopefully that should have answered the question as like, why did you actually spend so many months building this, and what makes the Migrates board special? So that's really about it. At the moment, we have 70 plus role titles and counting. Whenever there is a member who joins us who, we did not have their role title, we can actually add that on a per request basis. Now, Karina, I can
slide Rim really quickly just to cover that, because there's a few questions as well in the chat. So a lot of people are asking about if we're targeting different roles. So just so you guys understand, like there is no job board that exists which tells people exactly if a role is going to get sponsored. We're using data to the best of our abilities to find out this information and give it to everyone, right? Like we're working really hard to get this data, and we have more data sets. We have data sets from the Home Office. We have data sets from other sources to help us understand if a job will actually get sponsored. We're doing this, like this is part of the Migrates platform. It's a full-time thing for us. It can't be free because we haven't built the tech, as in we haven't built the actual website it sits on, but we've built all the data. So we pay for the tech as well. So we're literally building it in real time in order to make sure that our members are going to land these jobs. Now, if let's say you joined our platform, which you don't have to, but I'm just giving you an insight, and you didn't see a role that you wanted, we would actually go and alter our algorithm to find more of those roles and put them into our job board. And our job board is updated every single day. So it has also other functionalities, like it has an ability for you to track those roles. It has an AI and CV builder, but it has a lot of other functions. But the most important thing is that we're focusing more and more on actually creating a better job board for everyone that to make sure that they can actually land a job with sponsorship. So then we will, we will have those kinds of roles available if you join, we will have more roles as well if you'd like to have them posted. Okay, cool. Let's go into the next slide. So are companies who sponsor your only hope? And the answer to that is no. So how many companies do you think actually sponsor in the UK? Okay. Are we
getting any good guesses?
I guess no one's gonna guess, but all good. So the answer to that is 120,000. So yeah, like that. No, yeah, not even more than 30K, more than 100K, but not a huge amount. Now, how many companies are there in the UK? 2.8 million. And how many companies are being added to the list daily? 50 to 60 new companies. So what that means, and I want you guys to think about that, 2.8 million companies still do not have a license to sponsor. And actually, many of our success stories have gotten companies to get their license to sponsor. And we're going to talk about what makes you a sponsorable candidate in the third part of our workshop. But this is something that I want you to understand because it will help you also look into the kinds of companies that will do it. There are millions of companies out there who you might be the right fit, even if they don't have a license. Even if you are from outside of the UK, because we have had members who have done it, not for a crazy job like a software engineer, but literally as a UX consultant. That was Renee's journey. She literally had the company get their license to sponsor her to come to the UK with only 3 years of experience. They really liked her that much. So these are companies that we've also worked with and we've helped them get their sponsor licenses. So Odin was a company that we worked with to get their sponsor license. Attraction Tickets, we helped them get a certificate of sponsorship for Catherine, who will also be joining us on Sunday. And then Borderless and Invincible already had their licenses to sponsor, but we helped place Kian and Grisha in those businesses because of the type of business that they were. So here are some companies who are willing to sponsor. SMEs, startups, and boutique organizations. So these are the reasons why SMEs will sponsor. So when I talk about an SME, I'm talking about a small and medium-sized business, and those types of businesses usually have 100 to 200 employees. And typically the reasons why they sponsor is because there's no rigid HR process. And we'll talk about this in day 3, but really HR is like your biggest enemy when you're trying to land a job with sponsorship. So there's less than 200 employees typically in an SME, which is why they're more open to doing it. And they're typically looking for someone who is more of a specialist in the business. Startups as well are really great source for people looking for a job with sponsorship, especially those that have been recently funded. They might be looking for new talent. They're usually Series A to Series B, and they have less than 100 people. I would even go so far to say as looking into startups that have less than 50 people is your best bet. And I just want to focus on startups for a second and why I think that they are truly the future of helping people land sponsored jobs. I'm actually doing a TED Talk on this on March 1st. I'm doing a whole TEDx talk on exactly why startups are the right place for international hires. And this is because they typically struggle in finding the right talent, and they need the right talent really quickly. And they actually usually need people who are more generalist and also junior in their careers to do more things. So it's definitely a more high pressure environment, but the reality is that you are going to be more of an asset, which is why if you've got, if you're on a graduate visa, if you're on the YMS visa, if you're on a HPI visa, and you have time to prove to a startup that you're worthy. I did it with Deliveroo. I was offered a job, but I turned it down because I wanted to do my master's at Edinburgh. I did it with Cedars, and I didn't do it with Klaviyo because I was on the Youth Mobility Scheme visa at the time, and they wouldn't actually sponsor anyone. That was their choice, and that's why I went to Cedars. But startups are the types of companies where they value early stage talent. They want you to get your hands dirty. They need the help, and they are probably one of the best places for people to start looking for jobs. The thing is with startups, and this is what we'll cover tomorrow when it comes to effective outreach, is that they are not always advertising jobs. So you have to be very strategic about where you are applying and how you're finding these businesses. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that. You can do it through websites like TechCrunch and looking at recent fundraising rounds. You can do it through looking at accelerators like BCG Ventures and Entrepreneur First, and just finding out more information about different types of startups that are looking to kind of hire. Welcome to the Jungle is another website that features a lot of roles in startups. And literally just Googling like startups UK, like where to find a job, like you will find loads of different lists and loads of different resources that exist to help you find more startups. But I will tell you that like it's still a very wide industry. When I talk about startups, you need to also focus in on something like maybe it's healthcare, maybe it's B2B marketplaces, maybe it's fintech. Like I can talk about startups literally. I probably should do another workshop on it because I can talk about this all day. And I truly think that it is one of the best ways that you will get sponsored. And lots of members in Migrates have been sponsored within startups. And then last but not least are boutique organizations. So boutique organizations are less than 50 people. They're looking for longer term hires. So for them, having someone that's with them for a while is really important. And again, they're looking for people who are more specialists. Now, some of you on this call might not necessarily have the most amount of experience. Sorry, and actually I just noticed that someone's saying startups can also be financially unstable sometimes. So if you can see, I said recently funded, because typically recently funded startups actually have roughly 16 to 20 months of runway. They're raising for a longer period of time. So when you're talking about, I'm talking about like recently funded businesses, not businesses that are, big and have a whole wide team, etc. I'm literally talking about companies that have just raised funding. They will be looking for new hires. And you getting a 2-year visa with them is way better than having, getting on a skilled worker visa pathway, having some experience, and then being able to jump ship if something happens. And yeah, that's kind of, I have a lot to say on the topic. And I think it's really like, it's interesting that people always go, well, there's no financial stability. I mean, do you see KPMG right now? Like, have you seen HSBC is laying off all their investment managers? Like, do big corporates have financial stability? I think that a lot of companies don't have a lot of financial stability right now. But if you're joining a smaller organization, especially one that has just raised funding, you're probably more likely to stay with them for a longer period of time because they have the money in order to keep themselves afloat. So that's kind of my point on that. And then with boutique organizations, again, like the smaller the business, the more ingrained you can become within it. And they also oftentimes, if you're early on in your career, they're looking for someone in a more assistant or in an administration role, or maybe working very closely as an executive assistant to the business owner. So those are also the types of businesses that you need to be looking into. I would almost, again, Google is your friend in these instances. I would focus on a specific sector and the subsector within that. So for example, if you wanted to focus on something like insurance, maybe you could look into like life insurance policy companies or consulting firms that focus on specifically that area of insurance. So you need to really hone in on something specific, which is why the zone of genius and what Rim was talking about, it's really focusing on something very, very kind of just a lot more detailed and something that is more relevant to your skill set, but something that is just more focused in a specific sector industry focus. So many of these companies don't advertise roles, as I said. So how do you get their attention? Well, that is something that we are going to be covering tomorrow in our day 2 of crafting your outreach and acing your interviews. We do have some kind of special things to give away and also to help you guys with and give you a little bit of homework because this is something that we want to do tomorrow. So we're going to be giving you a special gift. Our gift to you is that we personally want you to join Migreats. Obviously, I mean, this is something that we have built to help people, and it's our full-time jobs, and we completely dedicate our lives to building this community and building all of the resources that we have inside. Yes, sorry. So someone just asked if our fees have been reduced. Yes, we have reduced our fees. Now, we did this because we want to make Migreats more affordable. And before we had our membership at £129, and we just realized that, it's even though £84 is still expensive, you're getting a CV review, you're getting workshops, you're getting Q&As, you're getting the job board, you're getting a lot of help. So it's something that, like, you know, we just want to make it more accessible. And we do have a free trial as well, but you just don't get access to the job board. So if you want to get like everything included, then yeah, you have to join on the Migrates membership. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being present. And hopefully we will speak with you guys soon. So see you tomorrow or see you Sunday.